AITA for telling my husband's coworker that she can have him if she wants? I know this sounds insane, but I genuinely meant it, and now everyone thinks I'm either crazy or playing some twisted game. My husband and I have been married for 3 years and together for 7. I love him more than anything, but I have always had one rule when it comes to relationships. I will never compete for a man. If someone else can take him from me, then he was never really mine to begin with. I grew up watching my mom chase after my dad and beg him to stay faithful. She would check his phone and follow him and cry and scream at other women. He still cheated on her constantly, and she stayed with him for 20 years before he finally left her for someone else. I promised myself I would never be that woman. I would rather be alone than be with someone who needs to be convinced to love me. My husband knows this about me, and he has always said he respects it. He told me early on that he would never cheat because he's not that kind of man. I believed him, and I still want to believe him. But lately there's this woman at his job named Claire, who has been making me question everything. It started about 4 months ago when he mentioned her for the first time. He said she was new to the team, and that she was really smart and funny. I didn't think anything of it. Then he started mentioning her more and more. Claire said this funny thing at the meeting. Claire brought everyone coffee. Claire is going through a divorce and needed someone to talk to. I started to notice that he would text her after work hours. He said it was just work stuff, but I saw her name pop up on his phone at 11 at night once. I asked him about it calmly, and he said she was just venting about her divorce and that he was being a good friend. I told him I didn't like it, and he said I was being paranoid and that Claire was just a colleague. Last month, his company had a holiday party and spouses were invited. I finally got to meet the famous Claire. She was pretty and confident, and she looked at my husband like he hung the moon. She barely acknowledged me and spent most of the night talking to him and laughing at everything he said. At one point, I went to get a drink, and when I came back, she had her hand on his arm. I watched them for a moment, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but something like resignation. I walked over and introduced myself properly. I told her it was so nice to finally meet her since my husband talks about her all the time. She smiled and said he talks about me too. Then I said something that I know sounds insane, but I meant every word. I told her that if she wanted him, she could have him. I said I don't compete for men, and if he would rather be with her, then I would step aside. I told her that I love him enough to let him go if that's what he wants. Her face went completely pale and she didn't know what to say. My husband grabbed my arm and pulled me aside and asked me what I was doing. I told him I was being honest. I said I refuse to be the jealous wife who polices her husband, and I refuse to pretend I don't see what's happening. I told him the ball is in his court, and whatever he decides, I will accept. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. He said nothing was happening with Claire, and that I had just humiliated him in front of his coworker. I told him I didn't humiliate anyone and that I just made my position clear. The drive home was silent. When we got home, he told me I had crossed a line and that I had no right to say that to Claire. I asked him why he was so worried about her feelings if nothing was going on between them. He didn't have an answer for that. It's been 3 weeks since the party and things have been tense. He barely talks to me, and when he does, it's short and cold. My sister says I played a dangerous game and that I basically gave him permission to cheat. My mom says I'm a fool and that I should have fought for him like a normal wife. But I don't want to fight. I want to be chosen. I want him to look at all his options and still pick me because he loves me and not because I guilted him or trapped him. Yesterday he came home and told me Claire asked to transfer to a different team. He said she felt uncomfortable after what I said to her. He asked if I was happy now. I told him I wasn't happy or sad, and that I just wanted him to be honest with himself about what he wants. He went to the bedroom and closed the door. I slept on the couch. This morning I woke up to a text from him. He said he needed to tell me something and asked if we could talk tonight. My heart sank, but also I felt strangely calm. Whatever he tells me, I will handle it. Because I have spent my whole life preparing for this moment, I spend the entire day at work unable to focus on anything except tonight's conversation. My stomach twists in knots every time I check my phone. The spreadsheet in front of me stays exactly the same for 40 minutes because I can't make my fingers type anything. My coworker Jessica stops by my desk around 10 and asks if I'm feeling okay. I tell her I'm fine, even though I'm obviously not fine. She doesn't push it, but I can see her giving me worried looks for the rest of the morning. I keep refreshing my email like something important might come through, but nothing does. The clock moves so slowly it feels broken. Every minute feels like 10 minutes, and I keep thinking about what he might say tonight. I make myself drink water because my mouth is dry, and I realize I haven't eaten anything since last night. My hands shake a little when I pick up my coffee cup. I try to do some work around 11, but I end up just staring at the same numbers without understanding what they mean. My boss walks by, and I quickly click to a different screen like I've been busy. I don't think he notices, but I'm not sure. The morning drags on forever, and I feel like I'm watching myself from outside my body. At lunch, I text my sister instead of going to the cafeteria. I tell her about the message he sent this morning. She calls me back within 30 seconds instead of texting. Her voice sounds worried when she answers. She says I need to prepare myself for the possibility that he's been having an emotional affair with Claire this whole time. She reminds me that my ultimatum might have pushed him to make a choice I won't like. I sit in my car in the parking lot listening to her talk. She asks if I've thought about what I'll do if he says he wants to be with Claire. I tell her I don't know. She says I should have a plan before tonight. I tell her I can't think about plans right now. She gets quiet for a second and then says she can come over tonight if I want her there. I tell her no, because this is something I need to face alone. She makes me promise to call her afterward no matter what time it is. I promise even though I'm not sure I'll be able to talk to anyone after. We hang up and I sit in my car for another 20 minutes. I watch other people walking to their cars or heading back inside. Everyone looks so normal, and I wonder if any of them are going through something like this. My phone buzzes with a work email, but I don't open it. I leave work at 2:30 because I can't pretend to be productive anymore. I tell my boss I'm not feeling well, which is technically true. He doesn't ask questions. I get in my car and start driving, but I don't go home right away. I just drive around the city for over an hour. I pass the coffee shop where we had our first date. I drive by the park where he proposed. I keep thinking about my mom crying in the bathroom while my dad was out with another woman. I remember finding her on the floor once with mascara running down her face. She was calling his phone over and over, but he wasn't answering. I was 14 and I didn't know what to say to make it better. I just sat next to her until she stopped crying. I promised myself that night that I would never let a man make me feel that way. I would never beg someone to stay. I would never check phones or follow anyone or scream at other women. I promised myself I would walk away before it got to that point. But now I'm driving around trying to prepare myself for him to choose someone else, and I don't feel strong like I thought I would. I just feel empty. I stop at a red light and close my eyes. When the light turns green, the car behind me honks. I keep driving. When I finally get home at 4 in the afternoon, his car is already in the driveway. He usually works until 6. Seeing his car there early makes everything feel more real. I sit in my car for 10 minutes trying to steady my breathing. My hands grip the steering wheel even though the engine is off. I watch our front door like maybe he'll come out, but he doesn't. I can see a light on in the kitchen through the window. I think about just driving away again, but that would only delay this. I need to know what he's going to say. I need to know if my marriage is over. I check my face in the mirror and I look tired. My eyes are red even though I haven't been crying. I take 3 deep breaths like I read somewhere that's supposed to help with anxiety. It doesn't really help. I finally open my car door and walk up to the house. My legs feel weak. I put my key in the lock and turn it slowly. The house is quiet when I step inside. He's sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee already poured. One is in front of him and one is at the chair across from him. The sight of both cups makes me want to cry, but I don't. It feels both thoughtful and scary at the same time. Like he's trying to be nice before he breaks my heart. He looks up when I walk in. He looks like he hasn't slept well either. There are dark circles under his eyes and his hair is messier than usual. He's still wearing his work clothes, but his tie is loose. He doesn't smile. I don't smile either. I set my purse down on the counter and walk over to the table. The coffee is still steaming, which means he made it right before I got here. I wonder if he was watching for my car. I pull out the chair and sit down. The coffee cup is warm in my hands. Neither of us says anything for a long moment. The refrigerator hums in the corner. I can hear a car driving past outside. Everything feels too loud and too quiet at the same time. We sit there in this awful silence where neither of us knows how to start. I can feel my heart beating in my chest. He opens his mouth like he's going to say something, but then closes it again. I can't take the waiting anymore, so I finally just ask him to tell me what he needs to say. My voice sounds steadier than I feel. He takes a long breath and wraps both hands around his coffee cup. He says he's been thinking about what I said at the party for 3 weeks straight. He says he needs me to understand something about him that he's never told anyone. His voice is quiet and serious. I nod even though I don't know what he's going to say. He looks down at his coffee instead of at me. I wait. The silence stretches out again. Then he starts talking about his childhood, and I realize this conversation is going to go somewhere I didn't expect. He tells me that when his parents divorced when he was 12, his dad just disappeared. He says his dad didn't fight for the marriage at all. One day he was there, and the next day he was gone. He says he grew up believing that if someone really loved you, they would fight to keep you. He says my willingness to just let him go felt like I didn't actually love him enough to try. His voice cracks a little when he says this. I feel something crack open in my chest because I never knew that about his childhood. He never told me his dad just left like that. Suddenly, his anger at the party makes more sense. He thought my refusal to compete was me not caring rather than me protecting myself. I never explained the difference because I assumed he understood my history. I assumed he knew why I couldn't be the wife who fights and begs. But he was seeing it through his own trauma just like I was seeing everything through mine. We've been hurting each other without meaning to. I want to reach across the table, but I don't know if I should yet. He keeps talking. He admits that Claire did become someone he talked to more than he should have. My stomach drops even though I knew this was coming. But then he swears nothing physical ever happened between them. He says she was going through her divorce and he was feeling disconnected from me. He says their conversations filled a space that had opened up in our marriage without either of us noticing. He talks about how she would text him about her problems and he felt needed. He says he liked feeling like someone's hero even if it was just about work stuff or divorce advice. I listen without interrupting. Part of me wants to yell at him, but a bigger part of me knows I helped create this distance between us. I've been so busy making sure I wasn't my mother that I forgot to actually be a wife. I kept him at a distance because distance felt safe. But distance also feels lonely, and he went looking for connection somewhere else. I ask him directly if he has feelings for Claire. The question hangs in the air between us. He takes a long time to answer, which makes my heart pound so hard I can hear it in my ears. I watch his face while I wait. He finally says he was attracted to the attention she gave him. He says he liked the way she seemed to need his advice and made him feel important. But then he says he doesn't think it was about Claire specifically. He says it was more about feeling important to someone again. About feeling like he mattered. That answer hurts worse than a simple yes would have because it means our marriage was already broken before Claire even showed up. She was just a symptom of something that was already wrong between us. I set my coffee cup down because my hands are shaking too much to hold it steady. We sit there looking at each other across the table, and I realize we're both scared of losing what we have, but we're also scared of staying in something that's been slowly dying. Neither of us knows what to do next. I tell him that what he just said hurts worse than if he'd admitted to loving Claire. At least that would mean our marriage was broken because of something specific, something we could name and maybe fix. But this means the cracks were already there before she showed up, spreading through the foundation while we both pretended everything was fine. I set my coffee cup down because my hands won't stop shaking. I tell him I've spent so much energy making sure I wasn't my mother, that I forgot to actually be present in my own marriage. Maybe keeping him at a distance looked exactly like not caring about him at all. Maybe my hands-off approach just felt cold instead of respectful. He reaches across the table like he wants to hold my hand, but stops halfway through the motion. His fingers hover there in the space between us, and he looks at me like he's asking permission for something that should be automatic between married people. I don't move toward him, but I don't pull away either. We just sit there in this awful in-between space where everything feels like it might shatter if either of us moves wrong. His hand stays suspended for a few seconds before he pulls it back to his side of the table. The kitchen feels too quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I start talking because the silence is unbearable. I tell him about watching my mom go through my dad's phone at 2 a.m, about how she would follow him to the grocery store to make sure he was actually going to the grocery store, about the time she showed up at his office and screamed at his secretary because she thought they were sleeping together. I tell him about the other women's voices on the answering machine, and the lipstick on his collar, and the receipts from restaurants we'd never been to. I tell him how my mom would cry and beg and promise to be better, and my dad would just look at her with this tired expression like she was embarrassing herself. I tell him I decided when I was 14 that I would rather be alone for my entire life than live like that. That I would never check anyone's phone or follow anyone or beg anyone to choose me. He listens without interrupting, and when I finish, he says he understands that now. He says he gets why I built those walls and why I made that rule about never competing. But then he says there's a difference between refusing to police someone and refusing to show them they matter to you. He says I took it so far in the opposite direction that he never felt like I actually cared if he stayed or left. We keep talking, and it turns into this long conversation about all the ways we've been failing each other without even realizing it. 2 hours pass, and we're still at the kitchen table with cold coffee and neither of us has moved. He admits that he started mentioning Claire all the time because he wanted me to react. He wanted me to show some kind of jealousy or possessiveness or anything that proved I cared about losing him. He says he would tell me stories about her just to see if I would get upset, and I never did. I just listened and asked polite questions like he was talking about the weather. He says it felt like I didn't care who he spent time with as long as it wasn't my problem. That admission feels manipulative but also heartbreakingly human. I understand the impulse even if I hate that he did it. I confess that I've been holding him at arm's length since the day we met. That I was so terrified of becoming my mother that I never let myself be vulnerable with him. I never let myself need him or depend on him or show him that losing him would destroy me. I kept one foot out the door of our marriage just in case, always ready to walk away with my dignity intact. He says he felt like he was always auditioning for me instead of being my partner. Like he was on probation and one wrong move would make me leave without looking back. He says that uncertainty made him crave validation from someone who actually seemed to need him. The sun starts to set through the kitchen window and we're both exhausted. My throat hurts from talking and my eyes are dry from crying earlier. But something has shifted between us even though I can't name exactly what it is. He asks if I want him to leave for a while so we can both think. He says maybe we need space to figure out what we really want. I realize that's exactly what the old me would have said yes to. The me who always kept an exit strategy ready would have jumped at the chance to create distance. But I tell him I want him to stay. The words feel strange coming out of my mouth, but I mean them. That night we sleep in the same bed for the first time in 3 weeks. We don't touch each other, but we're not actively avoiding contact either. We just lie there on our separate sides with about a foot of space between us. I can hear him breathing in the darkness. I lie awake for a long time thinking about how my determination to not be my mother almost turned me into someone just as lonely. Just in a different way. The next morning, I wake up to the smell of coffee and eggs. He's in the kitchen making breakfast without being asked. We sit down together and eat in this careful silence that feels different from the angry quiet of the past few weeks. This silence isn't hostile. It's just uncertain. He tells me between bites of toast that he already told Claire he couldn't be her sounding board anymore. He says this happened even before she requested the transfer to a different team. He says he should have set that boundary months ago when she first started texting him about personal stuff. I ask him what he wants from our marriage now. He sets his fork down and looks at me directly. He says he wants to feel like I actually want him here instead of just tolerating his presence. He wants to know that I would miss him if he left. He wants me to show him that I care about him staying. I tell him I do want him, but I don't know how to show it without feeling like I'm begging. The line between expressing love and being desperate feels so thin to me. He says we need to figure out what the middle ground looks like between begging and indifference. My phone rings while we're cleaning up the breakfast dishes. It's my sister calling to check on me. I step into the living room and answer. She asks how the conversation went, and I tell her we talked for a long time, but didn't make any final decisions about our marriage. She gets frustrated with me immediately. She says I need to either forgive him completely and move on or leave him. She doesn't understand why I'm sitting in this middle space. I try to explain that real life is more complicated than those two options, that we're trying to figure out if we can fix what's broken between us. She says I'm making it too complicated, and that I'm overthinking everything like I always do. I want to argue with her, but I also know she's never been married. She's never had to untangle 7 years of shared history and figure out which parts are worth saving. I hang up with my sister and find him still at the kitchen table staring at his empty coffee cup. He looks up when I walk back in and asks if I'm okay. I tell him I'm tired of everyone having opinions about what we should do when they don't actually live in our marriage. He nods and says he's been thinking the same thing. We sit there for a minute not saying anything, and then he asks if I would be willing to try counseling. The question catches me off guard because I always thought therapy was something you did when you were about to get divorced. He says he doesn't want to get divorced, though. He says he wants to figure out how to fix what's broken between us, but he doesn't think we can do it alone. I tell him yes before I can overthink it. He pulls out his phone right there and starts searching for therapists in our area. I watch him scroll through profiles and ratings like we're picking a restaurant. He finds someone named Vivian Reeves who has good reviews and an opening next week. He calls and makes the appointment for both of us. We both have to take time off work, but neither of us argues about it. After he hangs up, he tells me the appointment is Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I write it down on the calendar even though I know I won't forget. The rest of the day feels strange. We move around each other carefully like we're both afraid of breaking whatever small piece we've managed to create. He does laundry and I clean the bathroom and we don't really talk, but it's not hostile anymore. That night we order takeout and eat in front of the TV watching some cooking show neither of us cares about. He falls asleep on the couch halfway through and I cover him with a blanket before going to bed. The next few days are weird in a different way than before. We're polite to each other, but it feels forced. We talk about whether we need milk and what time the trash pickup is, but we avoid anything real. I catch him looking at me sometimes like he wants to say something, but then he just asks if I need anything from the store. I do the same thing. I'll start to bring up something about us and then chicken out and ask about his day at work instead. We're both waiting for Tuesday like it's some kind of deadline. I tell my mom I want to meet for coffee on Saturday. She sounds surprised but says yes immediately. We meet at this place near her apartment that she likes. She's already there when I arrive, sitting at a table by the window. She hugs me when I sit down and asks how I'm doing. I tell her we're going to counseling next week. She looks relieved and says that's good. I order a latte and then I ask her the question I've been thinking about for days. I ask her why she stayed with Dad for so long. She stirs her coffee for a long time before answering. She tells me she thought fighting for him was what love looked like. She says she believed that if she could just be better or prettier or more understanding, then he would stop cheating. She says by the time she realized he didn't want to be fought for, she had already wasted 20 years. She looks older when she talks about it. I ask her if she regrets it, and she says every single day. Then she surprises me by saying she thinks I went too far in the opposite direction. I start to defend myself, but she holds up her hand. She says refusing to show you care about someone is just another way of being afraid. She tells me that healthy love isn't about chasing someone or pretending you don't care. She says it's about being brave enough to be honest about what you need. I feel something shift in my chest when she says that. She reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. She tells me not to make her mistakes, but also not to overcorrect so hard that I end up alone anyway. We finish our coffee and talk about other things, but her words stick with me. Tuesday morning comes and we both get ready in silence. I change my outfit 3 times before settling on jeans and a sweater. He puts on a button-down shirt, which he only does for important things. We drive to the office building where Vivian works, and neither of us talks in the car. The waiting room is small with beige walls and magazines nobody reads. We sit next to each other on uncomfortable chairs until a woman opens the door and calls our names. Vivian Reeves is probably in her 50s with gray hair and glasses. She shakes both our hands and leads us into her office. There's a couch against one wall and she sits in a chair across from it. We sit on opposite ends of the couch with a good 2 feet between us. She asks us to tell her why we're here and we both start talking at once. She holds up her hand and says one at a time. My husband gestures for me to go first. I try to explain about my rule and the party and Claire, but it all comes out jumbled. Vivian stops me and asks me to be more specific. She asks what I mean when I say I won't compete for a man. I tell her about my parents and watching my mom fall apart. She nods and takes notes. Then she asks my husband to explain his perspective. He talks about feeling like nothing he does is ever enough. He says I make him feel like he's always one mistake away from me walking out. Vivian asks him if that's what happened with Claire. He says he doesn't know exactly, but that Claire made him feel needed in a way he doesn't feel at home. I feel tears starting, but I push them back. Vivian looks at me and asks me to describe what competing for a man means to me. That's when I lose it. I start crying, talking about my mother checking my dad's phone and following him around town. I talk about how desperate she looked and how much I hated watching her beg. Vivian hands me tissues and waits until I'm done. Then she says something that makes me stop crying. She tells me I've been treating any expression of need as weakness. She says I've been testing my husband constantly to see if he'll stay without me giving him any reason to. She asks me if I've ever actually told him I need him, or if I just expect him to know. I realize I haven't. Not once in 7 years. She turns to my husband and asks him why he needed Claire's attention specifically. He's quiet for a long time. Then he admits that I make him feel like nothing he does is ever quite enough to earn my full trust. He says he knows about my parents and he understands why I'm careful, but that living with someone who always has one foot out the door is exhausting. Vivian writes something down and then looks at both of us. She says we're both operating from childhood wounds that have nothing to do with each other. She says we need to separate past trauma from present reality. The session ends and we both feel raw. We walk to the car without talking. He asks if I want to get dinner and I say yes. We go to this Italian place we used to go to when we first started dating. We sit across from each other and actually talk about the session. He tells me he didn't realize how much my mom's marriage affected me. I tell him I didn't know about his dad leaving without a fight. We're both learning things about each other that we should have known years ago. Over the next few weeks, we see Vivian twice a week. The sessions are hard, but we start to communicate better. She gives us homework that feels stupid at first. She tells us to say one thing we appreciate about each other every day. The first few times are awkward. He tells me he appreciates that I always remember his coffee order. I realize I've been showing love through small actions while keeping my words locked up tight. He says he needs both the actions and the words. I'm learning that telling him I love him doesn't turn me into my mother. I tell him one night that I appreciate how he's never thrown the Claire thing in my face, or made me feel dumb about what I did at the party. He looks surprised and says he knows he created the problem by not being honest when he started feeling far away from me. We're both trying to own our parts instead of just protecting ourselves. It feels different from our old fights where we both just defended and defended until we were too tired to keep going. Now we actually stop and think about what we did wrong instead of just pointing fingers. The homework from Vivian helps because it forces us to say nice things even when we don't feel like it. Some days I have to really search for something to appreciate, but I always find something real. He does the same thing, and I can tell when he's struggling to think of something, but he always comes through. 3 weeks into therapy, Vivian asks us to describe what we want our marriage to look like in 5 years. We both start talking about kids and buying a house and having family dinners and all the normal stuff people say. She listens and takes notes, and then she stops us. She asks if we can actually picture being happy together, or if we're just listing things we think marriage is supposed to include. The question hits me hard because I realize I've been describing a magazine version of marriage instead of thinking about what I actually want with him specifically. He goes quiet too, and I know he's thinking the same thing. We sit there for a minute not saying anything, and Vivian just waits. That question cracks something open between us. We start talking about how we've been acting like we're married instead of actually building something real between us. He admits he doesn't know how to be close to someone without feeling like he's being tested to see if he'll mess up. I admit I don't know how to let someone get close without waiting for them to leave me. We're both scared of the same things, but we've been handling it by pushing each other away. Vivian writes a lot during this part, and I wonder what she's putting in her notes about us. When the session ends, we sit in the parking lot for 20 minutes just talking about what came up. He tells me he wants to figure out how to be close without it being scary. I tell him I want that too. Vivian gives us new homework at our next session. She says we need to practice being open in small pieces, starting with sharing one fear or worry each week. The first time we try it, I feel sick to my stomach. We're sitting on the couch after dinner, and I make myself say it out loud. I tell him I'm afraid that if I show him how much I need him, he'll realize he has power over me and he'll use it. His face does this thing where I can see how much that hurts him to hear. He asks me if I really think he would do that, and I say, I don't know what I think anymore. I just know that's what I'm scared of, and it's been controlling everything I do. He doesn't get defensive or tell me I'm wrong. He just sits with it and then says he's sorry I've been carrying that fear around by myself. The next week, it's his turn to share something. He takes a long time to start talking, and I can see him working up to it. Finally, he says he's afraid I only stay with him because I'm too stubborn to quit and I hate to fail at things. He thinks maybe I don't actually like being with him and I just don't want to be divorced. That one guts me because I never thought about how my whole thing about not competing might look like I don't care if he stays or goes. We both just sit there feeling sad about how much damage these fears have been doing while we kept them locked up inside. I reach over and put my hand on his knee and tell him that's not why I stay. I stay because I love him, even though I'm bad at showing it. He puts his hand over mine and we sit like that until it's time to go to bed. About a month after our first real conversation, we're watching some show on TV and not really paying attention to it. He reaches for my hand without thinking about it like it's the most normal thing in the world. I let him hold it and we sit like that for a whole hour, not talking, just being together. It feels like more progress than all our therapy sessions because it's easy and natural instead of feeling heavy with meaning. When the show ends, we both realize we don't even know what happened in the episode because we were just sitting there holding hands. We laugh about it and it's the first real laugh we've had together in months. Something has shifted and we both feel it. My sister comes over for dinner the next week and she notices right away that something is different. She keeps looking at us while we cook and clean up together. After we eat, she pulls me into the bedroom and asks if I'm really okay, or just pretending for her benefit. I tell her I think we're actually fixing things and she looks shocked. She admits she was completely sure we were headed for divorce after what happened at the holiday party. She thought there was no way back from that. I tell her we're working on it and it's hard, but we're both trying. She hugs me and says she's glad she was wrong. Work throws my husband a surprise party for his birthday and he texts me to come. I feel nervous about seeing his coworkers after the whole Claire situation, but I make myself go anyway. When I get there, everyone is friendly and normal and no one acts weird around me. I realize I built the whole thing up in my head way bigger than anyone else was thinking about it. Most of his coworkers probably forgot about it or never knew what happened in the first place. I feel stupid for avoiding his work events for months because I was scared of what people would think. A woman from his team named Polly Mendoza comes over while I'm getting a drink. She tells me she's glad I came and that she was worried about him during those weeks when everything was bad. She says he seemed really lost and she's happy to see him smiling again. That makes me realize other people could see our problems even when we thought we were hiding them. She asks how we're doing and I tell her we're working on things. She says that's good because she could tell he loves me by how miserable he was when things were wrong. 2 months into therapy, Vivian asks if we're ready to talk about Claire directly, instead of dancing around it. We both get tense, but we agree because we know we have to face it eventually. She walks us through looking at what actually happened versus what we were scared was happening. She makes us separate the facts from the feelings, and it helps to see it laid out like that. My husband looks down at his hands and then back at me. He tells me that when Claire would ask for advice or text him late at night, it made him feel like he was good at something. He says at home he always felt like he was walking on eggshells waiting for me to decide he wasn't worth keeping around. He admits he liked her attention because it made him feel needed in a way he didn't feel with me. Then he stops and looks me right in the eyes and says he never seriously thought about leaving me for her. He says he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't figure out how to stop without admitting there was a problem. I take a breath and tell him that I was so scared of turning into my mother that I pushed him away before he could leave on his own. I explain that every time I felt myself wanting to check his phone or ask where he was, I would force myself to back off because that's what my mom did, and it never worked. I tell him I created the exact distance I was trying to avoid by refusing to show him I cared. We both sit there looking at each other and I can see he understands now why I said what I said at the party. Vivian leans forward and asks us what we're hearing and what the other person just shared. My husband says he hears that I was protecting myself, but that it felt like rejection to him. I say I hear that he was looking for connection, and found it in the wrong place because I wasn't giving him what he needed. Vivian nods and tells us we were both so busy protecting ourselves from our worst fears that we stopped actually being married to each other. She says the Claire situation was just a symptom of our real problems and not the cause of them. She tells us that we would have hit this crisis at some point with or without Claire, because we weren't dealing with the actual issues in our marriage. She asks us if we understand that removing Claire from the picture doesn't fix what's broken between us. My husband says yes, and I nod, because I know she's right. We've been treating Claire like she's the problem when really she just exposed all the cracks that were already there. I feel this weird mix of relief and fear wash over me. Relief because it means this isn't just about Claire and whether my husband wanted her instead of me. Fear because it means we have actual work to do on our relationship, and there's no guarantee we'll be able to fix it. Vivian asks us what changes we each need to make, and for a long time neither of us says anything. Finally, I tell her that I need to learn how to ask for what I want, instead of waiting to see if he'll figure it out on his own. I admit that I've been testing him constantly by not telling him what I need, and then getting upset when he doesn't read my mind. I say I need to stop treating every request or complaint like it makes me weak or desperate like my mom. My husband reaches over and puts his hand on mine, and I don't pull away. He tells Vivian he needs to be more direct about when he's feeling disconnected instead of seeking validation from other people. He says he needs to understand that my independence doesn't mean I don't need him, and that he has to stop interpreting my self-sufficiency as rejection. He admits he's been looking for proof that I don't really want him instead of believing me when I say I do. Vivian tells us these are good starting points, but that changing these patterns is going to be hard work. She says we're both going to mess up and fall back into old habits, and that's normal. She asks if we're both willing to keep showing up and trying even when it feels impossible. We both say yes. She schedules us for next week and tells us to think about one small thing we can each do differently before our next session. The next few weeks are strange because we're both trying so hard to be different that sometimes it feels forced and awkward. I make myself tell him when I'm feeling insecure instead of just going quiet and waiting for him to notice. He makes himself come to me when he's having a bad day instead of texting his coworkers about it. We're both learning new ways to be with each other, and it doesn't feel natural yet, but it feels like progress. One night, I'm loading the dishwasher, and he comes up behind me and asks if I'm mad about something. I almost say no automatically, but then I stop myself and tell him I'm frustrated that he left his clothes on the bathroom floor again after I asked him not to. He apologizes and goes to pick them up right away, and I feel stupid for even bringing it up. But later that night, he thanks me for telling him instead of just being silently annoyed, and I realize this is what Vivian meant about learning new patterns. 3 months pass, and we're still going to therapy every week. We've gotten better at talking to each other, but we haven't really fought about anything serious. Everything feels careful and polite, like we're both afraid to rock the boat. Then one session, Vivian asks me about something my husband mentioned the week before when I wasn't there, and I didn't know he had a solo session. I feel this flash of anger that he went without me and talked about our marriage behind my back. I try to push it down, but Vivian sees it on my face and asks what I'm feeling. I tell her I'm fine, but she doesn't let it go. She keeps pushing until I finally admit I'm mad that he had a whole conversation about us without me there. My husband looks confused and says Vivian suggested we each do one individual session to talk about our personal stuff. He says he didn't think it was a secret and he assumed I knew. I snap at him that clearly I didn't know, and that it feels like he's talking about me behind my back just like he did with Claire. His face changes and he tells me that's not fair, and that he's allowed to have his own therapy session. I say of course he's allowed, but that doesn't mean I have to like finding out about it this way. Vivian sits back and watches us, and I suddenly realize she's not going to step in and calm us down. She's letting us fight. My husband says he's tired of feeling like he has to tell me every single thing he does, or I'll assume he's doing something wrong. I tell him maybe if he hadn't spent months texting another woman, he wouldn't have to deal with me being suspicious now. He raises his voice and says he's sick of having Claire thrown in his face every time we disagree about something. I raise my voice back and tell him that's what happens when you break someone's trust. Vivian finally speaks up and asks us to pause. She tells us this is good, and that we need to learn how to fight without attacking each other's character. She walks us through expressing our anger without making it about who the other person is as a human being. She teaches us how to say I feel instead of you always, and how to stick to the actual issue instead of bringing up every past mistake. We practice right there in her office, and it feels ridiculous but also helpful. By the end of the session, we're both exhausted, but something has loosened between us. We drive home in silence, but it's not the angry silence from before. When we get inside, he asks if I want to keep talking about it, and I say yes. We sit on the couch, and I tell him I'm angry that he made me feel crazy for months when I knew something was wrong. I tell him I kept questioning my own judgment because he kept insisting nothing was happening with Claire and that I was being paranoid. He sits with that for a minute and then tells me he's angry that I gave up on us so easily at the party instead of fighting for what we had. He says it felt like I was looking for an excuse to leave, and Claire just gave me one. I start crying and tell him I wasn't looking for an excuse, I was just trying to protect myself from getting hurt worse later. He starts crying too, and says he was trying to protect himself from my indifference by finding someone who seemed to actually want him around. We're both crying and yelling and saying things we've been holding in for months. We talk about his parents' divorce and my dad's cheating and how we both brought so much baggage into this marriage without ever unpacking it. We talk until 2 a.m, and by the end we're both wrung out, but also lighter somehow. He reaches for me and I let him pull me close. We end up kissing, and then more than kissing, and it's the first time we've had sex since the holiday party. It feels different from it used to. We're both actually present and paying attention instead of just going through the motions. Afterward, we lie there in the dark, and he tells me he was scared he'd lost me forever. I tell him I was scared I never really had him to begin with. He pulls me closer and says he wants to keep trying, and I say I do too. The next day, my mom calls and asks how I'm doing. I tell her we're working things out and going to therapy and actually making progress. She's quiet for a long time, and then she says she's proud of me. I almost drop the phone because my mom never says stuff like that. She tells me she's proud that I'm doing the hard work she never did with my dad. She admits she should have either left him years earlier or actually tried to fix their marriage instead of just suffering through it. She says she's glad I'm not repeating her mistakes in either direction. I don't know what to say, so I just thank her. She tells me she's been thinking a lot about her own choices lately, and that watching me deal with this situation has made her realize how much time she wasted. We talk for almost an hour, and it's the most honest conversation I've ever had with my mother. When we hang up, I feel like something has shifted between us too. 4 months after we started therapy, Vivian asks us how we think we're doing. My husband says he thinks we're making real progress, but that he still has moments where he falls back into old patterns. I agree and say I still catch myself wanting to shut down when things get hard. Vivian asks if we want to keep coming every week, or if we feel ready to space out our sessions. We look at each other and both say we want to keep coming, but maybe cut back to once a week instead of twice. She says that sounds reasonable and that we're doing better than a lot of couples who come to her. She reminds us that we're going to have setbacks, and that's normal, and the important thing is that we keep showing up for each other. That weekend, my husband suggests we take a trip together, just the two of us. He says we haven't done that since before Claire entered the picture, and he thinks we need it. I agree, and we start looking at places we could go. He brings up the town where we got engaged and asks if I'd want to go back there. I think about it and realize that returning to that spot with everything we've learned feels right. It feels like a way to remember why we chose each other in the first place, and to see if we can choose each other again, now that we know what we're really getting into. I tell him yes, and he books us a cabin for the following month. We spend the next few weeks preparing for the trip, and it gives us something to look forward to together. My sister comes over for dinner and notices right away that we seem different. She keeps watching us while we cook and clean up and finally pulls me aside to ask what changed. I tell her we're actually dealing with our problems instead of avoiding them, and she looks shocked. She admits she was completely sure we were headed for divorce after everything that happened. I tell her we still have a long way to go, but that we're both actually trying now. She hugs me and says she's glad she was wrong about us. The weekend away turns into something we both needed more than we realized. We drive up to the mountains where we got engaged 5 years ago, and the whole drive there we talk about everything and nothing. He tells me about a project at work that's stressing him out, and I actually listen instead of half paying attention while thinking about something else. We stop at this little diner halfway there and split a piece of pie, and he reaches across the table to hold my hand without thinking about it. When we get to the cabin, it's smaller than I remembered, but in a good way, like it forces us to be close to each other. We spend the first evening just sitting on the porch watching the sun go down and not talking much, but the silence feels comfortable instead of heavy. The next morning we go for a hike, and he takes my hand on the trail, and we walk like that for an hour. We talk about wanting to try for a baby next year, if we can keep making progress like this, and it's the first time we've talked about the future, like we're actually planning it together, instead of just hoping we'll make it through. He says he wants to be a dad, and that he wants our kids to see what a healthy marriage looks like, and I realize that's what we're building now. That night we make dinner together in the tiny cabin kitchen, and we keep bumping into each other and laughing about it. We talk about all the hard conversations we've had over the past few months, and how scary it was, but how much better things are now. He tells me he's glad I confronted Claire at the party, because otherwise we might have gone years without dealing with our problems. I tell him I'm glad too, even though it almost destroyed us. When we get back home on Sunday night, I feel different somehow, like something shifted during the weekend. Monday morning he goes to work, and for the first time in months I actually miss him instead of feeling relieved to have space. I text him around lunch just to say I'm thinking about him, and he sends back a heart emoji that makes me smile like an idiot. He texts back later asking how my day is going, and we have this whole conversation about nothing important, but it feels important anyway. When he gets home that night, he kisses me hello and tells me he missed me too, and we make dinner together and talk about our days like normal couples do. The rest of the week goes like that, with us texting during the day and actually being happy to see each other at night. My coworker notices I seem happier and asks if something good happened, and I realize I've been walking around smiling without meaning to. I tell her things are just better at home, and she says she's glad because I seemed really stressed for a while there. 6 months after everything fell apart, we have a session with Vivian where she asks us what we've learned about ourselves and each other. I think about it for a minute because I want to give her a real answer instead of just saying we're better. I tell her I've learned that protecting yourself from pain also means protecting yourself from joy, and that I'd rather risk getting hurt than live in the careful distance I was keeping before. I explain that I spent so long trying not to be my mother that I ended up being just as lonely as she was, just in a different way. Vivian nods and asks my husband the same question. He takes a breath and says he's learned that seeking validation outside the marriage was easier than doing the hard work of building real closeness, but that the easy path was slowly killing what we had. He tells Vivian he's actually grateful the holiday party happened because we might have gone years more without dealing with these issues, and we might have ended up divorced without ever understanding why. I reach over and take his hand, and he squeezes it back. Vivian smiles at us and says she can see how much work we've both put in. She tells us she's really impressed with our progress and thinks we're ready to move to monthly check-ins instead of weekly sessions. Part of me panics at the idea of not having her there every week, but another part of me knows we're ready. She warns us that we'll still have hard days and that our old patterns might come back when we're stressed, but that we now have the tools to handle those moments differently than we did before. She reminds us that marriage is work, and that we'll need to keep showing up for each other even when it's hard. We both agree to the monthly schedule, and she gives us some things to work on between now and our next session. Walking out of her office feels different this time, less like we're barely holding it together and more like we're actually building something solid. My birthday comes around a few weeks later, and my sister takes me out for dinner to celebrate. We're sitting at this restaurant downtown, and she's watching me with this weird look on her face. Finally, she says she can see a real difference in how I talk about my husband now, that I actually sound like someone who's in love instead of someone who's just determined not to fail. The comment catches me off guard because I didn't realize I'd been coming across that way before. I tell her that I am in love with him, and that I'm learning that love takes courage, and not just commitment. She asks what I mean, and I try to explain that it's scary to let someone matter that much to you, to give them the power to hurt you, but that the alternative is worse. She looks at me for a long time and then says she's proud of me for doing the work, instead of just walking away like she thought I would. I ask her why she thought I'd leave, and she admits she was sure we were headed for divorce after the holiday party. She says she's glad she was wrong about us. A month later, we decide to host a dinner party with some friends we haven't seen much since everything got bad. I'm nervous about it because I don't want people to see us and think we're still a mess. But my husband says we should stop hiding. We invite 3 couples over and spend all day Saturday cooking and cleaning. When people start arriving, I feel myself getting tense. But then my husband puts his hand on my back and I relax a little. Throughout the night, I notice how different we are with each other now. Touching and laughing and finishing each other's sentences like we used to when we first got together. At one point, I'm in the kitchen getting dessert ready and one of our friends comes in to help. She tells me that whatever we did to fix things is really working, and that we seem happier than she's ever seen us. I thank her, and she gives me a hug and says she's glad because she was worried about us for a while. After everyone leaves, we clean up together, and he tells me he had fun, and that it felt good to be around people again. I agree, and we go to bed feeling like maybe we're going to be okay. 7 months after everything fell apart, my husband comes home from work one day with flowers for no reason. He hands them to me and says he's been thinking about how close we came to losing each other and it scared him. He tells me he never wants to take our marriage for granted again, and that he's committed to keep working on being the partner I deserve. I put the flowers in water and turn around to look at him, and I can see he means it. I tell him that means a lot to me, and that I know we still have work to do, but I'm grateful for how far we've come. I tell him I'm committed too, and that I'm learning to show up fully in our relationship, instead of keeping one foot out the door, just in case things go bad. We sit down on the couch and talk about how we both came into marriage with broken ideas about what love looks like, him from his parents' divorce and me from my parents' toxic marriage. We talk about how we're building something healthier together, something that doesn't look like either of our childhoods. He says he thinks we're going to make it, and I say I think so too. We sit there holding each other, and I feel something settle in my chest, like I can finally breathe all the way. A few days later, my mom calls and asks if she can come over for coffee. I say yes, even though I'm nervous about it because we haven't really talked much since everything happened. She shows up Saturday morning, and we sit at the kitchen table with our coffee and make small talk for a while. My husband is home, and he comes in to say hello, and my mom asks if she can talk to him for a minute. I start to leave, but she says I can stay if I want. She turns to him and tells him she wants to apologize for any role her marriage played in how I approached mine. She says she knows her relationship with my dad messed me up, and she's sorry if that made things harder for us. My husband looks surprised, but he's kind about it. He tells her we're all just doing our best with the patterns we inherited, and that what matters is we're breaking the cycles now. My mom starts crying a little, and I reach over to hold her hand. She tells us she's proud of how hard we've worked to save our marriage, and that she wishes she'd had the courage to do the same thing years ago. We sit there for a while longer talking about family patterns and healing and doing better than the generation before us. When my mom leaves, she hugs us both and tells us to keep fighting for each other. After she's gone, my husband and I look at each other and he says that was intense but good. I agree, and we spend the rest of the day just being together and feeling grateful for second chances. 8 months after everything almost fell apart, we walk into Vivian's office for what she tells us will be our last regular appointment. She says we can still come back every 3 months for check-ins if we want, just to make sure we're staying on track. We sit on her couch and she smiles at us in that way she does when she's proud of something, and she tells us she's worked with a lot of couples who were in crisis. She says most of them spend all their time pointing fingers and waiting for the other person to change first, but we actually did the hard work of looking at ourselves and figuring out what we needed to fix in our own behavior. She tells us that's what made the difference. That willingness to take responsibility instead of just blaming each other. My husband reaches over and takes my hand while she's talking, and I don't pull away or feel weird about it anymore. We thank her for everything, and she hugs us both at the door, and when we get in the car, I feel this weird mix of grateful and nervous, because now we have to keep doing this work without someone watching to make sure we don't mess it up again. That Sunday morning, we try out the thing Vivian suggested in our last session, where we sit down together and talk about how we're feeling about us. It feels super awkward at first because we're sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, and it's like we're having a meeting about our marriage, which sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. But he takes it seriously, and asks me if there's anything from the past week that bothered me, or made me feel disconnected. And I admit that when he stayed late at work on Thursday without texting me, I felt that old familiar panic start to creep in. He apologizes and says he didn't even think about it because he was just finishing a report, and then he asks me what I need from him when that happens. I tell him I just need a quick text, so I know he's thinking about me, and he says that's easy and he'll do better. Then I ask him the same question, and he says he felt really good about us this week, that he's been noticing how much more we laugh together now compared to 6 months ago. We sit there for maybe 30 minutes just talking through the small stuff, and I realize this is exactly what Vivian meant about catching problems before they turn into big ones. By the 3rd week, it stops feeling like a weird therapy homework assignment and starts feeling like something I actually look forward to. This protected time on Sunday mornings where we're intentionally connected and honest with each other. Almost a year after that holiday party that nearly destroyed everything, we're lying in bed one night, and he turns to me in the dark and asks me a question that makes my heart skip. He asks if I would fight for him now if someone tried to take him away from me. I think about it for a real minute because I want to give him an honest answer. not just say what I think he wants to hear. I tell him yes, I would fight for him now, but not because I'm desperate or scared of being alone like my mom was. I tell him I would fight because I know what we've built together over this past year. All the hard conversations and therapy sessions and Sunday morning check-ins, and that's worth protecting. I tell him I finally understand that fighting for someone you love isn't the same thing as chasing someone who doesn't want you. He pulls me closer and I can hear the relief in his voice when he tells me that's all he ever wanted from me. He says he never needed me to be jealous or possessive. He just needed to know that I was choosing him actively, instead of just passively accepting his presence in my life. He tells me he spent so long feeling like I was always half ready to walk away, like I had one foot out the door just waiting for him to mess up so I'd have a reason to leave. I feel tears on my face because I finally get it. How my fear of becoming my mother made me act like I didn't care when really I cared so much it terrified me. I tell him I understand now that there's a huge difference between my mom's desperate pursuit of my dad and my own healthy investment in our marriage, that loving someone enough to work on problems isn't the same as begging someone to stay who wants to leave. We fall asleep holding each other, and for the first time in our whole relationship, I'm not scared of needing him, and I'm genuinely excited about our future, instead of just hoping we'll survive it. We both chose to do the hard work instead of walking away, and that choice made all the difference.